our president speaks and why he speaks that way, so that all of us can come together and work towards national progress and national unity. So with that, I now ask the co-sponsor. We have two sponsors of AMIC in the Philippines. One is Philippine Women's University, and the other one is the Asian Institute of Journalism and Communication. The two of them have pulled the resources to bring AMIC here and invest whatever human and financial capital is needed to make AMIC grow in the Philippines. Mr. Mon?
Thank you. Maraming salamat, Dr. Maslog. Incidentally, you would be interested to know that we are carried live through live streaming through Now Planet and also through Inquirer.net and even Inquirer Facebook. So if you have friends, text them, tell them that we are live and they can see you live and alive. So as Dr. Maslog was mentioned earlier, AMIC is hosted in the Philippines by two institutions, Philippine Women's University and the Asian Institute of Journalism and Communication. So to give his opening remarks is the chair of the board of directors of Asian Institute of Journalism and Communication and the CEO of Now Corporation, Mr. Mel V. Velarde.
President Jose Kiko Benitez, Dr. Crispin Maslog, and especially our guests of honor today, the Honorable Ernesto C. Abella, Presidential Spokesperson. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Morning. Anyone who is not intrigued or challenged by today's theme, check your pulse rate. Or perhaps call 911 or check in at the nearest hospital. The theme states, deconstructing toward understanding the communications content and style of President Rodrigo R. Duterte. Voila. Challenged before us today. For many months, we acted as if we were victims of his language and style. Today, we act as doctors of communication, linguistic engineers, social scientists, throw in all other professionals to this group, and hopefully we would decipher the codes, perhaps solve the mystery of his extremely novel, even shocking if not scandalizing to some, rhetoric. I congratulate AMIC, the Asian Media Information Center, Ramon Tuason, Kiko, Dr. Maslog, and their team for organizing this conference. I have a few points in mind to share with you. I thought of suggesting a principle to help us guide in this whole day event. Allow me to put forward the following, that as far as President Duterte's language is concerned, both content and style, this principle may apply. Language follows strategy. Again, language follows strategy, not the other way around. So probably the most irrelevant behavioral trait we could say about the president is that he is impulsive, that he just blurts out whatever crosses his mind. Of course, you and I don't think so. Communication detectives, we all are. How do we know? In the area of foreign affairs, he is not as aggressive, as spontaneous, or as violent with his use of language. For he knows that what a head of state says, even if it is against the domestic laws of his nation, is binding in international law. So he manifests and he proves that he knows which language to use in different areas of engagement. For there is a strategy behind the language. Once we define his strategy, we would be able to separate the sizzle from the steak. We would be able to remove the initial shock that hits us and throw us away, making us unable to capture the messages, perhaps even wisdom, if you will, hidden in the words, masked by the style. Words so imposing, so arresting, so scandalizing, if you will, which put you and I in a stupor that paralyzes us from thinking rationally. Sherlock Holmes would fire us instantly as his linguistic detectives. So if the strategy is to inflict fear and scare the daylights out of drug manufacturers, pushers, and users, his chosen audience, the language is clear. Quote, I will kill you. Would you prefer that he be a bit Shakespearean with his use of language? At least when he talks about killing or murdering, given the fact that he is president who ought to be subtle, decent, perhaps with some Victorian pedigree. The words of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice, perhaps, should President Duterte perhaps say to them, I demand a pound of flesh closest to your heart. Or you want him to emphasize the rule of law with the intent of liquidating the drug menace by saying, I will kill you, subject to the constitutional amendment on death penalty, subject to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. What do you think the response would be from his chosen audience? The underground criminal world, this vast network of interrelated syndicates, deeply entrenched in all sectors of our society, including the highest institutions of government, they would say, tuloy ang ligaya. The party continues. Now, after 6 months, in truth and in the contrary with his use of language and the actions that substantiate that language have produced a result. We see the beginning of the end of this menace. His language serves his strategy. Of course, as to whether it would end permanently, we have 5.5 years to know. So I offer this principle for your consideration today, that language follows strategy. Kindly consider this principle as we venture on the power of communications in politics, psychology, the arts, including the theatrics of words and meanings, in public service, and in a bigger sense, in re-engineering the social fabric and cultural makeup of a nation. Thank you, and good day to all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Velarde. The discussion has started. I saw some hands raising already, asking questions. They would like to start asking questions. But that will be for later because there will be more inputs coming from communication scholars and even language scholars, as you have mentioned earlier. At this point, may I now ask my co-anchor who will anchor the first session, Mr. Jose Joma Carlos. Where are you, Joe? There he is. Joe is also a former Secretary General of AMIC, and he's now with CNN Philippines, and that's not a commercial. Joe.
Thank you so much, Ramon. Should we ask our guest speakers to come to the stage? Secretary Abella and Mr. Francis Osorio. I'm not sure if Agatep is around. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see old friends and to meet some new friends. This session is on the President's communication content and style. And I started to research about some descriptions of the President's communication style and content. And let me just cite a few of them to introduce our panel discussion this morning. President Duterte, well, we started with Mr. Velarde saying about, his scandalous rhetoric. President Duterte has a combative rhetoric and a volatile communication style. His language is comical, colorful, and mixed with sarcasm. The President refrains from any boladas, abstraction, and motherhood messages. The President does not engage in double talk or ambiguities, but uses a lot of jokes and hyperbole and even cuss words. He speaks the language of the common man. How do we make sense of this diversity of description of the President's communication content and style? Should we just accept his overall package and learn to auto-delete the colorful parts of his language? Should we read between the lines and use our own creative imagination in interpreting his language? How can we better understand the President as the message and the medium? And that's what we want to achieve in today's panel discussion. So without much ado, let me introduce our two speakers today. I will introduce them now, and later on you can just do your presentation. The first will be Mr. Ernesto Ernie Corpus Abella, who is the presidential spokesman. He wears many hats as businessman, writer, and former evangelist who led the Hope of Asia Philippine Council of Evangelical Churches and the Koinonia Theological Seminary. He was an advertising man and columnist of Sunstar Davao. He is now currently presidential spokesperson for Philippine President Duterte, the man who negotiated his release from captivity from ethnic bandits in 1996. Our other speaker is Mr. Bong Osorio, who was my classmate at the University of Santo Tomas. He joined the Kapamilya Network in March 2007 after 3 decades of advertising and public relations practice in 4 multinational advertising agency networks, J. Walter Thompson, A. Sachi, DYR Alcantara, and Campaigns Incorporated. He became famous as head of ABS-CBN's creative division. He once headed the Public Relations Society of the Philippines and Manila Overseas Press Club, AD Foundation, and KBP Standards Authority. He was president of the International Association of Business Communicators Philippine Chapter in 2003 and 2004, and IABC Regional Director for Asia Pacific in 2007. So let me now call on Presidential Spokesman Ernesto Abella to speak. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Jose Benitez of Philippine PWU, Mr. Ramon Tuason, Secretary General of AMEC, Dr. Crispin Maslog, sir, Chair of the AMEC Board of Directors, Mr. Mel Velarde, Chair of the AGIC, distinguished resource persons, colleagues in the communication sector, and students, I imagine there are, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to be part of the panel on communication, content, and style of the President. As your overview states, this project is for the purpose of providing insights to citizens, including news media, on how they can better understand the way that the President communicates. And to elucidate to the President and his cabinet on how unfiltered language may affect Philippine interests. The goals are, how you might say, lofty. It seems to assume that one can objectively analyze the President's words apart from the observer's own biases. But let me try to give you a mini narrative of my own evolving role as a spokesperson. That might be of a better help. I met the President formally a few weeks after he was elected and before his inauguration. My prior intention was to work for him as a speechwriter, but within 5 minutes he was telling me that what he really wanted and needed was a spokesperson. In Cebuano, he said, palaaway na ko, palaaway pa ang spokesperson. I am already a scrapper, somebody who's ready and eager for a fight. And then you have another scrapper for a spokesperson. As you listen to it, it was a hanging sentence that meant he needed somebody to speak for him who did not have the same scrapper attitude as his. He defined spokesperson as a conduit between the president and the press and the people. He then invited me to observe a press briefing he was about to have and said, listen to what I say and listen to what the media says I said. I did. And I found out that there really was a difference between what he actually said and how it was interpreted. The misinterpretations he understood as media just getting sound bites that would sell the news. He also told me later, he said, you know, you do not have to be with me all the time. He just said, just listen to what I say. And with today's technology, you really don't have to be there physically always, but it helps to see the nuances, his body language. But if I cannot, I just usually get the transcripts or watch some of the videos. Later, excuse me, when his language became more colorful, he explained it as his way of getting attention for what he wanted to call attention to. In other words, he said it was an intentional shift in the use of language. I take, which is why what Mr. Velarde's sentence, our statement about language follows strategy makes so much sense, because he did explain it that way. Later, when his language became more colorful, he explained it as his way of getting attention for what he wanted to call attention to. But first, let me try to refer to his intentions. Many people try to analyze him and describe him as a master strategist and tactician. From what he shared with me early on, is that he does not depend on anyone to formulate his plans. He is ultimately responsible for what he says and does. So it's also important, therefore, to find out what really drives him. Saan siya humuhugot? By listening to what he says, one can reconstruct a consistent narrative. One, he was a reluctant candidate, but he ran because certain crucial national issues were not being addressed. For example, he says, none of the other candidates were addressed. From a long historical perspective. He goes back to 1521, when the Spaniards came to colonize the islands. He goes back to the fact that there was already an extant Muslim culture in Mindanao. And number three, he keeps going back to the fact that the Americans did not acknowledge the injustices that they did to the Filipinos, especially to the Muslims, which is what he attributes the Muslim problem to in Mindanao. Because he does say again and again that the Muslims have a long memory and that this situation that happened in Budao is actually an unforgotten situation. Number three, his socio-political views are inclusive and pro-poor. For example, he wants to give back the Coco Levy. And I heard him explain why. People said, why give it back? They'll just waste the money. He said, no. Hayaan nyo na minsan lang sa buhay nila may mahawakan silang konting pera. Kanila naman yun eh. Nag-aalala yung iba na gagastuhin lang yan. Sabi, hayaan mo na, pera nila yan eh. He understands that. 4, his appreciation of Asian and Malay values. When we were in China and in Japan, he kept stressing that again and again. How there was such a contrast to the Western in-your-face attitude and the very respectful, very quiet, very reserved manner of Asians, meaning East Asians, and the Malays. And he kept referring back to that again and again, and how he treasured those values, this sense of respect that people gave, and how people did not discuss matters which would be disturbing. And he would say again and again, especially about the South China Sea issue and the West Philippine Sea, we will not deal with those things, but we will not deal with those things now, but eventually we will at the right time. Number 5, his firm views that of the threefold dangers of crime, corruption, and drugs. Number 6, his 3-point national agenda, which is prosperity for all, elimination or reduction of crime, corruption, and illegal drugs, and also final and lasting peace with the Muslim insurgents, with the Muslim separatists, and also with the Communist Party of the Philippines. Number 7, his intent to foster harmony with neighbors. Number 8, his experience as mayor and prosecutor. All of these things made him acutely sensitive to the needs of people and to the need for action. Having given a short précis of his intentions, I'd like to touch on just a little bit on the Duterte effect. Not here so much, but abroad. Of course, there's a tremendous Duterte effect here, but especially abroad. We just came back from New Zealand. From Lima, Peru, and then we had a stopover in Auckland. And we sat down with the foreign minister of New Zealand. And I was there during the conversation, but the next day, the foreign minister did describe the president as being tough, but warm and courteous. And, you know, I was just listening to them, and the president truly was. Looking back, the president truly was simply being himself. Pinag-usapan po niya yung talagang mga issues niya, kaya lang he spoke it in English. And besides, and also, it was minus the color. In Japan, I sat down with the spokesperson of the Prime Minister Abe, and he said, nothing like this has ever happened in Japan before. The atmosphere was electric. The people were there was media actually waiting for him in street corners outside of the hotel. And they said, again and again, people would say, we admire the president. We admire the president. In China, he was quite like the rock star. The full honors were given him. And again, the spokesperson said, this is the first time anything like this has ever happened. And again, they would underline the fact that they admired him. So, not to mention the ASEAN, how he was deeply admired there. Now, I'm not saying this in order to promote him, I'm just simply narrating to you the effect that he has had outside, the effect that he has had on people who we were so cautious about. And for example, of course, there were reactions like from the EU and the EU ambassador who would tell me that the EU Parliament was disturbed by the alleged EJK killings. But aside from that, there was the response coming from these particular sectors. And for example, some people were so concerned whether the president would chew gum when meeting the emperor. You know, but it turned out that these were actually minor things as compared to the general effect he had on them. Of course, there was the Trump parallel. The media was taken quite by surprise. And I forget the commentator, but the commentator said, the reason why that happened was the media did not take him seriously, but took him literally. But the people who voted for him took him seriously, but not literally. And I believe that's an insight worth holding on to, especially with regard to the president. Because apparently, as Mr. Velarde has pointed out, the president actually understands the use of language, especially when he's addressing a particular sector, a particular segment, and he is. But he is like, I was asked earlier by Mr. Carlos whether he was really like that. I said, you know, you'd be quite surprised. Because sa Tagalog po, napakababa ng loob pagkausap mo siya. And he's quite respectful and quite, except that when there are certain times when he has to address, underline certain situations, he actually uses these language and quite consciously. Just to make reference, what makes a government succeed? A government succeeds if it delivers what people want and need from the government so that they themselves can achieve personal success. Ulitin ko po yan. A government succeeds if it delivers what people want and need from the government so that they themselves can achieve their own personal success. A government fails when it hampers, controls, or purposely makes the wrong decision to favor a few and not all. So why is Duterte succeeding? To a large part. Because he gets what people want. The people know he gets them. And people know he's trying to deliver what they want and need. People also see that there are those who are hampering Duterte. So in a sense, what has happened is what we have is a person who has a pulse on the people. He actually quite understands what people want and need. Saan po nanggaling yun? Him not being a traditional politician. First, let me just try to summarize by pointing out a few things. Number one, what does he really want? What is this all about? What are his actions all about? People think he's a loose cannon, that he just shoots his mouth, that he's quite reckless and all that. But if you listen quite carefully to what he said during his inaugural address, on his State to the Nation, he said one thing very specifically, and he keeps going back to this again and again. He wants a comfortable life for all. He wants a comfortable life for all. Actually, what he wants can be summarized by 4 questions he usually asked during his campaign. Number 1, kumain ka na ba? Pangalawa, may ano ba yung mga anak mo nag-aaral ba? Pangatlo, nakatanggap ka na ba ng medical attention? At pang-apat, do you feel secure? Have you eaten? Are your children in school? Have you received health care? And do you feel safe and secure? Basically, these are a summary of whether they are receiving quality public services. Doon po umiikot ang kanyang doon po umiikot yung kanyang mga tanong, doon po umiikot yung kanyang mga pananaw sa tao. So what should we all want? Excuse me. At the end of the day, what do we want and what does he want? At the end of the day, he wants a nation that is worthy of the Filipino and Filipinos who are worthy of the nation. Kumbaga, ang masasabi ko po, and when people ask me, what do I think about this? What do I think about that? I usually tell them I do not have an opinion about these matters that I talk about. I simply try to act like a conduit for the president. And so far, these are the things that I've seen. That he is motivated by the concern for public good and well-being. This is what drives him. This is what motivates him. And if at times he makes certain radical decisions or radical actuations, it is simply because he will not back down from something that he believes is right. Having said all of that, I would just like to say, I think it's an evolving story, and that we will do well by listening carefully. I was called out one time for saying, use your creative imagination. But basically, I also was saying, in effect, that what we need to see are not just the littler things, not just the external, but to see the substance, the internals that are working, that are driving him. And if anything at all, just by mindful listening, we can trace actually a narrative that says what he really wants is for the Filipino to have a comfortable life. Good morning. Blessings.